Hello, hello. Welcome back for another episode of Six Rotations. Well, I'm going to let Mick do a lot of the talking here today. I'm here in the airport. We're in transition. Big news, though, as always, we're brought to you by SMA Sports, better equipment for a better game. But Mick, you can deliver the big news. Mick and I are headed to Corpus Christi to cover a conference volleyball tournament and call all the action together on ESPN Plus. Go ahead, Mick.
Oh, it's going to be exciting, and there's some good teams. I've gotten to see three or four of these conferences now. I'm pretty excited. We talked to the coaches today. Didn't you think they were pretty knowledgeable and on top of things?
Yep. So we're doing the Southland Conference Tournament Championship. It's going to be in Corpus Christi. It's got, an undefeated team in Southeastern who's won 20 straight. It's got a talented host in Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And I'll tell you what, Mick, every coach, all 8 coaches that we talked to couldn't be more excited to be a part of the broadcasting. You sometimes you get coaches that aren't quite into the TV aspect of it, but it really looked like we had coaches who obviously knew who you were. And a couple of them, looked at you as mentor. And so that's going to be a lot of fun for you on the sidelines.
Well, I had a lot of chances to meet these guys and gals, and I've even mentored one of them, and so they're doing really well. And I think they're bringing the level of their conference really up to a standard that no one's seen before. These 8 teams will put on quite a battle, I believe, next weekend.
All right, Mick, I'm going to let you put on your host hat here. I want you to carry us through the upsets of the week, starting with, of course, the beloved Longhorns, who made a trip out to Manhattan on Wednesday and just did not come out well.
Well, I have to say Texas didn't really play badly. It was all Kansas State, and they were just on their game. And the first 2 sets were magnificent. In the third set, you thought, okay, same story. Texas is going to come back now, reverse sweep. Boy, that didn't happen, and Kansas State didn't even give them a chance. But one of the things that's really gotten Manhattan, Kansas going to support this Kansas State team is their new facility. And if you didn't see it, this new facility for volleyball is absolutely spectacular, and they fill it, and they were rowdy and they were up. I mean, if Texas was comfortable in Gregory Gym, they weren't so comfortable in this new facility at Manhattan, because it was quite a match. So I enjoyed that. I thought it wasn't a situation where Texas didn't play well. I thought it was a situation where Kansas State took it to another level and Texas couldn't bring it up there.
All right, well, let's go ahead and look at the AVCA Taraflex top 5 here. Nebraska did fall 1 set each in the week against Northwestern, against Illinois, but the Huskers got every single first place vote as expected. And then Mick, Stanford jumps up to 2 because Wisconsin did what Nebraska couldn't do, and that was fall in Rec Hall. Nebraska had, of course, the reverse sweep last week. This past weekend, it was Nittany Lion that finally got the big win over no Anna Schreck, though, but a still very talented Badgers team.
Yeah, and so it's changed the top 5. It's like, you're rolling the dice and playing Monopoly, and somebody got Park Place, but somebody else got Boardwalk, and it's a big battle. And so, you've got Stanford second, you've got Wisconsin down to third. Some people in some of the polls had Wisconsin even lower to fourth. They moved Louisville up to fourth. Louisville, big match coming up. We'll talk about this week with Pitt, but Texas is 5, and that's your top 5 right now. But the second 5 look pretty interesting also.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Stanford versus Oregon first, because Oregon is a team that could be right there. It was a Thursday night showdown in Maples Pavilion, and Oregon looked like they were going to come all the way back, didn't they? And then Stanford just battled back at the very end of the 5th set.
Yeah, and I thought Mamie Collier, the left side, really not ever got into that match for some reason. Stanford did a great job of getting their hands over the net on her. So we haven't seen the real Oregon, or maybe we saw the real Stanford playing some serious net defense. At any rate, that match was good, but Stanford certainly had control of it, seemed like the whole time.
All right. Well, why don't we can kind of open it all up, Nick? And you mentioned that the second 5. Why don't we go ahead and
well, that second 5 is Oregon at 6, Pittsburgh at 7, Tennessee moves all the way up to 8, Georgia Tech 9th, and Nebraska or Arkansas 10th, but I believe Arkansas has a win over Tennessee this year.
Yep.
So that's an interesting one for me. Some people say the eyeball test just seems like Tennessee is stronger. I think you get fooled by the quality of athletes they have because they're big, they're strong, they jump out of the gym, but their Achilles heel has been their ball control. And that's where Tennessee gets beat in the close games. So Georgia Tech didn't do so well last week with Louisville. They still are up there in the top 10. Pretty interesting. I think Pittsburgh's got to prove this week whether they're going to make a run at the top 4 or whether they're just going to sit there. But they're at 7, Oregon 6, Texas at 5. You could have any of those 3 in any of those positions.
I really liked Pittsburgh. You know, they swept Georgia Tech in Atlanta on Friday, obviously a place that Louisville went to a week and a half ago and had a lot of trouble with. And so I think I've got Pittsburgh as my most dangerous, you know, non-top 5 seed in terms of, you know, those teams in the second portion. But as you mentioned, we're going to get Pittsburgh against Louisville, and we're going to get Kentucky against Arkansas, which is going to be a really fun matchup here at the end of the month.
Yeah, and here's the deal with the coaches. They really think Kentucky's got to go in the third 5. Washington State dropped all the way to 11 with getting beat up there. Almost got beat twice. They lost to UCLA in 5 and then had to come back to get USC the next night after USC got a 2-0 lead on them. USC played really well the first 2 sets, 1 error and 3 errors in the first 2 sets, and that really took the crowd out of it up at Pullman, Washington. But to go back to Kentucky, they were horrendous getting started and maybe had the strongest schedule. At one point they were 2-8, I believe, and now the coaches have moved them all the way up to 12, and it looks like they've got a really good chance of winning the Southeast Conference. Besides.
Yeah. I'm not going to go out there. I think Kentucky has an outside shot at a top 4 seed heading into the March or whatever, excuse me, the selection Sunday, because Kentucky, they sweep Georgia, they sweep Auburn, they kick Auburn out of the top 25. If they keep on running, how are you going to leave an undefeated team in an SEC, which is one of the top 3 conferences? How are you going to leave the undefeated champion out of hosting through the regionals? I think they've got a pretty good argument. You know, as of now, their RPI is sitting down at 12. So obviously they need a lot to happen. But I'm just saying, if you see Louisville continue to get bludgeoned and you see, you know, maybe Stanford dropping, or I can't see Texas hosting anymore. I don't know about you, even though their RPI is still high, I just can't see it.
Well, and then with after Kentucky at 12, you got BYU 13. The coaches have got Penn State up at 14 because of that big win over Wisconsin. But, you know, if you look at the stats, all of the different stats, Purdue and Penn State are nose to nose. They're the same record in the Big 10. They actually have struggled against similar teams. So I had them tied at 16 actually, but the coaches have them at 14, and they've got Creighton at 15. I don't know. Creighton can score the ball better than both of those teams. So that's really interesting. So you've got Creighton at 15, Penn State at 14, BYU at 13, Kentucky 12, Washington State at 11. My goodness, you don't want to play any of those teams in the first round.
Yeah, let's give a couple updates. BYU swept through UCF twice. Kansas fell against Iowa State, so they drop out of a lot of people's consideration of hosting. But of course, we're going to have to see as Kansas finishes with a strong schedule. But Creighton, they're just not necessarily playing teams, right? They swept Seton Hall and they won in 4 against St. John's. But for the Boilermakers beat Michigan State and Minnesota, both in 4 sets. As you mentioned, Purdue and Penn State. Purdue is the 15th RPI. Penn State is 20. But Mick, I am going to go with the bias of the what have you done for me lately? And by beating Wisconsin, I've got the Nittany Lions in my top 16. Let's talk a little bit about it, right? Because we watched Penn State in those first 2 sets against Nebraska and what they can show. Cameron Hanna, the Clemson transfer who can jump out of the gym, she had 19 kills. Merzik had 16. But of course, not having Anna Schmreck is a huge deal.
Yeah, I think that is one thing. And Orzel had to carry a big load out there on the left side after being in the libero position most of the year. Now she was good and she was fun to watch, but she wasn't terminating like they get on the left side all the time. So yeah, we give Penn State credit, and I thought Penn State was very good that day, but they had the whole crowd into it. It was a whiteout. It was pretty fun. I mean, we've had so many fun matches this year. It's been just exciting to watch all of the crowds get into it and help the players play like this. But home crowds have made a big difference, and made a big difference for Penn State in that match, I thought.
So let's talk a little bit about the Big 12 conference, right? A week ago, it feels like maybe you have 4 hosts, but then Kansas falls and Baylor also lost twice to TCU.
Yeah, Baylor and Kansas both lose twice. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that's a huge surprise. BYU is going to hang in the conversation, but when you look at the Big 12 conference, do you put Kansas State now into the bubble on the good side? Because when you beat BYU twice and Texas in the same month without losing a set, it's hard to keep them out of the tournament.
Yeah, well, you have to look at the whole body, I suppose. But yeah, that's a pretty good effort. And don't forget, talking about the Big 12, but don't forget Arizona State. They seem to just be drifting away from the attention of everybody. Yet, if you look at their numbers, they're really pretty good. And the other scouting services have them pretty high. So that's another one to keep your eye on to see if they're going to bite somebody here in the next week or two.
Yep, Arizona State actually dropped down from 17 to 18, despite only losing 1 set against Colorado and Utah. Meanwhile, Dayton moved from 18 to 19. The coaches can't quite understand what they want to do with Dayton and Creighton. Dayton didn't drop a set against VCU, right? And so now, Mick, let's spend some time and talk about this upcoming week, because obviously we have a huge Wednesday matchup with Baylor against Kansas. Texas is going to take on Iowa State as well. But the big ones are Wisconsin, Purdue, Louisville, Pitt. Where do you see those two kind of filtering out?
Well, I'm going to start on the 17th. I've got 2 matches pigeonholed on the 17th. ASU versus Oregon. Let's see if ASU can do something there. I have also Purdue and Wisconsin. If Penn State can do it, can Purdue do it? And I think Wisconsin's traveling again. I'm not sure that that's right. You might want to check that. And then on the 18th, the one match, and it's the only match everybody's going to tune in, Pittsburgh and Louisville. That's going to tell us a lot about top 4. It's going to tell us a lot about the ACC. Yeah, that's going to be a fun match. And then on the 19th, we've got Stanford and USC. We've got Tennessee and A&M, and Arkansas and Florida. I mean, all of those matches are not for the top 4 positions, but they're for the next 5 or 6 positions, and they're going to be highly contested. And the thing about these matches is none of the rating services, the RPI, the KPI, those services all have these teams in different positions. Like we talked about the power conferences, but then what are you going to do with a Utah State, who KPI loves? They've got them up 20, 22, 24, somewhere in there. And then the coaches don't even put them on the poll hardly. So, they're 22 on the poll, but they're real high in the other indexes.
Well, they're 16
we just
in the
don't
RPI.
have anything to compare to.
Yeah, and they're 16 in the RPI. 16 in the RPI for
Yeah,
Utah State,
16 in the RPI.
Whoa.
And then there's a love affair going on with Florida State.
I like
the
it.
ACC.
I like it.
Nobody's talking about Florida State, but they're sneaking into 25, and they just keep winning,
Well, Florida State also controls their own destiny. They're tied for the lead in the ACC right now. Could you imagine if the ACC is won by a team not named Georgia Tech, Louisville, or Pitt? That would be so surprising. That would be a lot of fun. And for Florida State this weekend, they get a bit of a cupcake weekend with I think it's NC State and North Carolina. So a little bit of what do you want to call it? A little bit of a relaxing weekend for them to try to avoid.
You don't want to relax on NC State. That's right. What Louisville did, and that didn't work so well for them.
That's true. All right, let's talk about a couple other things. I do want to give a shout out to Coastal Carolina's Jalen Stout, who had her 11th triple-double this weekend. That was against Texas State. I don't know if you caught that. 11 triple-doubles in 1 year for the first time since 2019. And Santa Barbara, how about Santa Barbara? Hawaii got upset, so Santa Barbara has officially clinched the 1 seed in the Big West tournament. Of course, the first year the Big West doesn't have a regular season bid, they're going to have to go to the tournament and beat Hawaii in Long Beach.
Yeah, I just I think there's so many things to look at. You mentioned the Sun Belt, okay? You mentioned Coastal Carolina, but do you realize they have three teams under 45 in the RPI? Three teams in that situation. And that means if Coastal wins the tournament, they could get almost four teams into the tournament, theoretically. What would that do? That would really mess things up, you know?
Yeah, that would be
That would really mess things up.
that would be a nightmare scenario for some of the Big Ten or Big 12 border teams like Iowa State and UCF and Kansas State, for example, as well. Mick, are there any other things that you caught over the weekend here? We are going to do a little bit of a shorter episode. I do have to jump onto a plane here in a minute, but was there anything else, Mick, that really stood out to you? Obviously, with the Washington State,
The former assistant at TCU beats the head coach twice, Baylor.
yeah,
That was interesting. Don't know where Auburn's going. They lost twice this weekend. They can't continue to do that. Marquette seems to be invisible. So after their 3-0 loss to Creighton a week or two ago, now no one can see them. Who's going to come up next? Iowa State looks like the hot team, and they're playing Texas this week. So that's going to be one to watch. And I think that's Wednesday night, maybe.
Yeah, that is Wednesday. And then I did want to talk a little bit about Washington State. So why don't we do that while bringing up the Volleyball Magazine Super 16 poll here? The only team that dropped out of the Super 16 was Kansas. I'm curious, Washington State goes from 9 to 12 there. They had 2 match points against UCLA. I wasn't watching. I was on a basketball broadcast, but I know you were watching. What did you see from Washington State there at the end?
They're a really good team. They're really good players. They're really well coached. But they almost remind me, Ari Salinger said once that the reason the U.S. has a chance to win every time is that every player believes they are going to win when they go out there in the game. And Washington State, with a lot of the Euros, they just didn't look like they believed they were going to win. In the clutch time, they just didn't gel, and that I don't think is something the coaches can do something about. That's something the players have to decide. They're going to fight and go for it. That's the only thing I saw, and I could be wrong about that, but that's kind of the way it looked to me.
Okay, and so moving forward for Washington State, that's a team that this upcoming week, Mick, they're going to have Colorado and Utah. So, if you as a coach, would you rather have a weaker opponents coming off of a tough weekend like that, just a chance to kind of work on some things?
I think it's dangerous to have a weak opponent anytime in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think teams that get saddled with weak opponents have a very hard time. The coaches have a very hard time of getting the players to focus on short-term goals, what they're going to do on their side of the net, and not just about the score of the game. That's where they get in trouble. They think this opponent's not been winning, we'll win, and they don't prepare. Instead, one of the coaches we talked to today was very, very good about saying every time we are going to play somebody we think we should be, we focus on our side of the net, things we want to improve on. And the thing I liked the best was getting another player into the game and rooting for her so that she has a chance to be ready in case we have an injury or something in a tournament. So there's all kinds of things you can do with these matches, but you really got to get the kids to focus on that and have energy. And the rooting for the player who hasn't been playing that you put into a match is really important, I think, because they're not just wandering around on the sidelines thinking, well, wonder when I'm going to go back in, kind of thing.
Yep. And so I'll name a few more kind of must wins this weekend in my book in order to get a top 16. Kansas probably needs to win both against Baylor. I also think that Houston needs to beat both Iowa State and TCU to give themselves a fighting chance. But Mick, this is where we start to get into the bid stealing territory, right? Because you and I are going to be in Corpus Christi on Thursday calling the Southland tournament. It'll be 3 p.m., 6 p.m. Central Time each day, Thursday and Friday. So make sure to tune in on ESPN Plus. But Mick, Western Kentucky and Dayton are going to be playing in their conference tournaments this weekend. If either of them, more so Dayton, because I don't think, WKU really has a shot at being a top 16 seed. But if either of them lose their conference tournament, that's one less spot for an at-large team. So that's where teams have to start looking and rooting for the favorites to win their conference tournament.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if people get upset in these tournaments and these small conference tournaments, it's going to scare the living daylights out of some people that are sitting around 42, 43, 44, and 45.
Yep. And then moving forward, we're also going to try to do a little bit of coverage on the NIVC as well. So every team that kind of gets upset, kind of like a Southeastern, right, in the Southland or Texas A&M Corpus Christi, that's a prime spot for the NIVC. So I think we could have as powerful as an NIVC field as we've ever had, right? Because you can have, let's say, San Diego, Ohio State, Hawaii, to name a couple examples of teams that might accept and could
Maybe
be
even
in
Minnesota.
Indiana.
Maybe
Minnesota,
even in Minnesota, yeah.
yeah, Indiana. I still think Minnesota might sneak their way in. Where do you
Well, they're sure trying. They're right on the border, you know.
That's a great point. I do think this will be an interesting weekend for USC because USC is going to have a chance to topple Stanford, and that, there's still a lot of time left for a team to work their way into that top 20 conversation, and USC always seems to kind of hang around. So that'll be interesting if they could put a jolt into Stanford. But I want to say with this one stat, Mick, this was unbelievable. We'll finish it on this. Stanford beat Oregon State, all right, over the weekend. Stanford is 75-0 all time against Oregon State. Isn't that unbelievable?
75-0. That's a good
75 and 0.
stat.
And now they're going to leave conferences. Stanford's going to the ACC, Oregon State, who knows what they're doing. So they're going to finish forever as the Pac-12 dominant against Oregon State. That was just a stat that was like, wow, talk about a big sister, younger sister kind of rivalry there as Stanford has kind of dominated them. But why don't we go our separate ways here? Mick and I we're gonna try to do a ton of content while we're together in Corpus Christi, kind of cover some stuff for the Southland, and then obviously keep tabs on some of these other matches. Maybe we could watch some of them together. So make sure to stay tuned and follow us over at 6 Rotations on Twitter. And well, Mick, safe travels down to Corpus Christi. I'll see you down there.
All right.
All right.
Thursday morning.
There you go.
Bye-bye.
I'm Daniel. This is 6 Rotations.